AITA for blocking my mother after I caught her reading my therapy notes while cleaning my apartment? I found my mother sitting on my bedroom floor at 11:30 on a Thursday night, my therapy journal open in her lap, tears streaming down her face as she photographed each page with her phone. She didn't hear me come in. The spare key I'd given her for emergencies dangled from her keychain on my nightstand, next to the drawer she'd pried open with what looked like a butter knife. She was so absorbed in reading Dr. Ramesh's notes about my childhood trauma that she didn't notice me standing in the doorway for a full 30 seconds, watching her lips move as she silently read words I'd spent 6 months learning to say out loud. I'd given her that key 3 years ago when I moved into this apartment in Portland, right after my divorce from Melissa. Mom had insisted, saying, what if there was a fire? What if I fell in the shower? What if I had a medical emergency and she needed to get to me? I was 32 years old, but she made it sound so reasonable, so maternal. Just for emergencies, she'd promised. She lived 20 minutes away in Beaverton, and I'd thought having her nearby would be comforting after everything with Melissa fell apart. I'd thought a lot of stupid things back then. The journal wasn't even supposed to exist. Dr. Ramesh, my therapist at the Wellspring Mental Health Center, had suggested I keep handwritten notes between our sessions as a way to process the panic attacks that had started after the divorce. Not a diary, he'd explained during our third session, but a space to record thoughts I wanted to explore later, patterns I noticed, moments when the anxiety felt manageable versus overwhelming. The physical act of writing, he'd said, created distance between the emotion and the observer. It helped. Within 2 months, my panic attacks had decreased from 3 times a week to maybe once every 10 days. I'd filled an entire journal with observations about my mother's behavior, my ex-wife's gaslighting, the ways I'd learned to ignore my own instincts to keep peace in relationships where peace was impossible. Mom had texted me at 10:15 that night. Sweetie, stopped by to drop off that lasagna I made. You weren't home, so I let myself in and put it in your fridge. Also tidied up a bit. Your place was a mess. Love you. I'd been at my friend Nathan's place watching the playoffs, and I'd responded with a thumbs-up emoji, thinking nothing of it. She'd done this before, maybe half a dozen times over the past 3 years. I'd come home to find my dishes done, my laundry folded, once even my bathroom scrubbed. It annoyed me, sure, but I'd written it off as her way of showing love. My therapist had other words for it: boundary violations, enmeshment, control disguised as care. I'd spent the last 4 months working up the courage to have a conversation with her about it. I didn't get the chance. I came home early because Nathan's girlfriend showed up unexpectedly, and I felt like a third wheel. I walked into my apartment at 11:28, saw the lights on in my bedroom, and assumed she'd forgotten to turn them off. Then I heard her voice, soft and wounded, reading aloud. Dr. Ramesh asked me today why I feel responsible for managing my mother's emotions. I told him about the time in 8th grade when Dad left, and she said if I really loved her, I'd stay home from the science fair to keep her company because she couldn't bear to be alone. My own words, in my mother's voice, echoing through my apartment like an accusation. She looked up when I cleared my throat, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across her face that wasn't shame or embarrassment. It was calculation. She was deciding what mask to wear. Then her expression crumpled into tears, and she held out the journal like an offering, like evidence of my betrayal instead of hers. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I was just cleaning, and this fell out from under your bed, and I saw my name, and I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I was worried you were writing bad things about yourself, and I needed to know if you were safe. The words tumbled out in a familiar rush, the same breathless explanation she'd used when I'd caught her reading my text messages in high school, when she'd opened my college acceptance letters, when she'd called my boss at my first job to ask why I was working such long hours. Get out, I said. My voice sounded strange, detached, like it belonged to someone else. Give me the journal and get out of my apartment. She didn't move. She was still sitting on my bedroom floor, my journal clutched to her chest, her phone in her other hand. I could see on the screen that she'd taken at least 15 photos. How long have you been here? I asked. She didn't answer. I stepped into the room and saw that my closet was open, boxes pulled down from the top shelf, their contents rifled through. My filing cabinet drawer hung open, the one where I kept old tax returns and medical records. The drawer where I'd stupidly, naively kept the folder from my initial intake appointment with Dr. Ramesh, complete with my diagnostic impressions and treatment plan. My hands started shaking, that familiar precursor to a full panic attack. I recognized the signs, the tightness in my chest, the way the room seemed to tilt slightly, the ringing in my ears that made everything sound distant and muffled. I forced myself to breathe the way Dr. Ramesh had taught me. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. Mom, I said, and my voice cracked. You need to leave, right now. She stood up slowly, still holding my journal, and I saw her thumb move across her phone screen. She was sending the photos. Right there, in front of me, she was sending my therapy notes to someone. Who are you sending those to? I asked, but I already knew. My Aunt Linda, probably. Maybe my grandmother. Mom had a habit of recruiting family members to her side whenever she felt threatened, building a coalition of concerned relatives who'd call me to express their worry, to suggest I was overreacting, to remind me that family was forever, and I only had one mother. It was a pattern I'd documented extensively in the very journal she was holding. Mom, I'm not asking again. Give me my journal, give me your phone, and leave my apartment. Now. She took a step backward, toward my window, and her expression shifted again. The tears stopped. Her voice, when she spoke, was cold and precise. I'm your mother. I have a right to know if you're telling lies about me to some stranger. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I've sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay me? By twisting everything I've ever done into some kind of abuse story for your therapist? She waved the journal at me. This is sick, David. You need help, real help, not whatever this quack is filling your head with. Something in me snapped, not into anger, but into clarity. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app. Mom, I'm recording this. For the third time, I'm asking you to return my private property and leave my home. You entered without permission. I have a key, she interrupted. You gave me a key. That means I have permission. I kept my voice level. A key for emergencies does not give you permission to enter my home when I'm not here, go through my private belongings, and photograph my confidential therapy records. That's a violation of my privacy and possibly illegal. I'm asking you to leave. She laughed. Actually laughed, this sharp, brittle sound that made my stomach turn. You're going to call the police on your own mother? Over a journal? They'll think you're insane. Everyone will think you're insane. I'll tell them about the divorce, about how Melissa said you were paranoid and controlling, about how you've been acting strange for months. Who do you think they'll believe? She held up her phone. I already sent these to Linda and your grandmother. They're worried about you, David. We all are. Maybe it's time for an intervention. I stopped recording and immediately called 911. Mom's eyes went wide. What are you doing? She hissed. The operator answered, and I explained as calmly as I could that I'd returned home to find an intruder in my bedroom going through my private papers, that they'd refused to leave when asked, and that I needed police assistance. Yes, I knew who it was. My mother. Yes, I was serious. No, this wasn't a family dispute. This was trespassing and theft. The operator said units were on their way and asked me to stay on the line. Mom's face went through a remarkable transformation. The cold calculation melted into what looked like genuine panic. David, what are you doing? You can't. They'll arrest me. I'm your mother. She moved toward the door, still clutching my journal and her phone. I stepped aside to let her pass but followed her to the living room. Ma'am, the 911 operator said in my ear, officers are 2 minutes away. Is the intruder still in the residence? Yes, I said. She's trying to leave now. Don't attempt to detain her, sir. Just maintain distance and wait for officers to arrive. Mom stood by my front door, her hand on the knob, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. If you do this, she said quietly, everything changes. You understand that? You're choosing a stranger over your own mother, over your family. I met her eyes and felt, for the first time in my life, absolutely no guilt about what I was about to say. You already made that choice for me when you violated my privacy and my trust. I've been asking you to respect my boundaries for years. You've never listened. Maybe you'll listen to the police. The officers arrived 3 minutes later. Officer James Whitmore and Officer Patricia Nguyen, both with the Portland Police Bureau. I let them in, explained the situation, showed them the recording I'd made. Mom tried to tell her version, the concerned mother who'd found disturbing writings and was just trying to help her troubled son. But Officer Nguyen asked her directly, Ma'am, did you have explicit permission from the resident to be here tonight and to go through his personal belongings? Mom hesitated. I have a key, she said. That's not what I asked, Officer Nguyen replied. Officer Whitmore asked to see the journal Mom was still holding. She refused to hand it over, claiming it contained things that proved I was a danger to myself or others. Then that makes it evidence, he said, putting on latex gloves and gently but firmly taking the journal from her hands. He flipped through it briefly, his expression neutral, then looked at me. Sir, is this your property? Yes, I said. It's my therapy journal, private medical information. He nodded and handed it back to me. Ma'am, I'm going to need your phone as well. Absolutely not, Mom said, backing away. That's my personal property. Officer Nguyen stepped forward. Ma'am, your son has stated that you photographed his confidential medical records without permission. That phone contains evidence of potential HIPAA violations and theft of personal information. You can hand it over voluntarily, or we can obtain a warrant. I watched my mother's face as she realized she'd miscalculated. She'd expected me to back down, the way I always had. She'd expected the police to take her side, to see her as the concerned parent and me as the ungrateful son. Instead, Officer Whitmore was putting on a second pair of gloves and holding out his hand expectantly, while Officer Nguyen was asking me if I wanted to press charges for trespassing and theft. Yes, I heard myself say. I want to press charges for everything applicable. The next 6 hours were a blur. Mom was arrested, processed, and held overnight. I spent 2 hours at the police station giving a formal statement, handing over the recording I'd made, explaining the pattern of boundary violations that had been escalating for years. Officer Nguyen was patient and thorough, asking questions that made it clear she'd dealt with this kind of family dynamics before. We see this more than you'd think, she told me. Parents who can't let go of control, who use concern as a weapon. The key thing is that you documented everything and you stood your ground. I called Dr. Ramesh's emergency line at 2:30 in the morning. He called me back within 10 minutes, listened to the whole story, and said something that made me start crying for the first time that night. David, what you did tonight was incredibly brave. You set a boundary and enforced it, even when it was terrifying. That's enormous progress. We talked for 20 minutes about next steps, about safety planning, about how to handle the inevitable fallout. He offered to write a statement for the police about the confidential nature of therapy notes and the damage that could be done by their unauthorized disclosure. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch, my journal in my lap, and read through every entry with new eyes, page after page of documentation. The time Mom had called my workplace pretending to be a doctor's office to find out my schedule. The time she'd told my ex-wife Melissa that I had anger issues after I'd asked Mom to stop dropping by unannounced. The time she'd cried for 3 hours because I'd gone on vacation without telling her my exact itinerary. The time she'd called me 15 times in a row because I hadn't answered her first text within 20 minutes. I'd written it all down, every incident, thinking I was the problem. Thinking if I could just understand her better, love her better, manage her emotions better, she'd respect my boundaries. Dr. Ramesh had tried to tell me, gently and over many sessions, that I wasn't responsible for fixing a dynamic I hadn't created. That boundary violations aren't accidents, they're choices. That love doesn't require sacrificing your sense of self. I'd resisted the idea, because accepting it meant accepting that my mother's love came with conditions I could never meet. It meant accepting that the person who was supposed to protect me had been, in her own way, one of the people I needed protection from. My phone started ringing at 6:15 the next morning. Aunt Linda calling to scream at me for having Mom arrested over a little misunderstanding. I let it go to voicemail. Then my grandmother, leaving a tearful message about how family forgives family, and I was breaking Mom's heart. Voicemail. Then my Uncle Robert, trying to play mediator, suggesting we all sit down and talk this through like adults. Voicemail. By 8 o'clock, I had 19 missed calls and 37 text messages, all variations on the same theme. I was overreacting, I was being cruel, Mom was just trying to help, she didn't deserve to be treated like a criminal. What would Dad think if he were still alive? I blocked every single number except my younger sister Cassidy's. She was the only one who'd been on the receiving end of Mom's behavior and recognized it for what it was. She called at 9 o'clock, and I actually answered. "Holy shit, David," she said. "Did you really have her arrested?" "She broke into my apartment and photographed my therapy records," I said. Then she tried to gaslight me when I caught her. Cassidy was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said finally. "I'm proud of you. She did the same thing to me last year with my psychiatrist's records. I didn't have the guts to do anything about it. I just changed my locks and stopped talking to her." That conversation was a revelation. Cassidy was 5 years younger than me, and I'd always seen myself as the protector, the buffer between her and Mom's intensity. I hadn't known she'd developed her own coping strategies, her own boundaries. We talked for an hour, comparing notes, and a pattern emerged that was even clearer than what I'd documented in my journal. Mom had been doing this to both of us for our entire lives, invading privacy under the guise of concern, manufacturing crises to maintain emotional centrality, punishing any attempt at independence with tears or rage or strategic victimhood. "The family is going to side with her," Cassidy warned. "They always do. She's already painting herself as the abandoned mother whose ungrateful children are too brainwashed by their therapists to see how much she loves them." "Let them," I said, and I meant it. "I'm done managing her emotions at the expense of my own sanity." Cassidy laughed, this surprised, delighted sound. "Who are you, and what have you done with my people-pleasing brother?" "He got therapy," I said. "Turns out it works." Monday morning, I met with an attorney named Rebecca Owens at a small firm in downtown Portland. She specialized in family law and restraining orders, and Officer Nguyen had recommended her. Rebecca was in her 50s, with steel gray hair and the kind of direct eye contact that made you feel like she'd seen everything twice. I showed her everything: the journal, the police report, the recording from that night, screenshots of the text messages from family members. She listened without interrupting, taking notes in neat, precise handwriting. "This is good documentation," she said when I finished. "Better than most cases I see. The fact that you have years of written records showing a pattern of behavior, plus the police report and recording, gives us a strong foundation." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "Here's what I recommend. First, we file for a restraining order. The arrest alone might not be enough to make her stop, especially if she sees this as a battle she can win through family pressure. Second, we send a formal cease and desist letter to every family member who's been contacting you on her behalf, making it clear that continued harassment will be documented and potentially prosecuted. Third, we prepare for the possibility that she'll try to retaliate, filing false reports, spreading information from your therapy notes to damage your reputation, attempting to interfere with your employment." My stomach dropped. "She wouldn't—" I stopped myself. Of course she would. She'd already photographed my therapy notes and sent them to family members. There was no logical endpoint to the escalation if she felt cornered. Rebecca saw my expression and softened slightly. "I know this is hard, But in my experience, people who violate boundaries like this rarely stop on their own. They have to be legally compelled to stop, and even then, it's not always enough. The good news is that Oregon has strong privacy laws, and the fact that these were therapy records, protected health information, makes her actions particularly serious. We spent 2 hours crafting a restraining order petition. Rebecca asked questions I hadn't even considered. Had Mom ever threatened violence? Had she shown up at my workplace? Had she contacted my friends or colleagues? The answer to all three was yes. There'd been an incident 3 months ago where she'd appeared at my office building, claiming she needed to talk to me urgently about a family emergency that turned out to be her wanting me to mediate a fight she'd had with Aunt Linda. My boss, Jeffrey, had mentioned it awkwardly the next day, asking if everything was okay with my family. I'd been humiliated. That goes in the petition, Rebecca said. Workplace interference. Any other incidents? I thought back through the journal. She called my ex-wife 4 times during our divorce proceedings, trying to get Melissa to tell her confidential details about our marriage counseling sessions. Rebecca's pen moved across the paper. Attempts to access confidential medical information. Good. What else? By the time we finished, the petition was 8 pages long, documenting incident after incident that I'd individually dismissed as Mom just being Mom, but which collectively painted a picture of someone who could not or would not respect basic boundaries. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. In the meantime, Rebecca sent cease and desist letters to 11 family members, including Aunt Linda, my grandmother, Uncle Robert, and several cousins I barely spoke to. The letters were polite, but firm, explaining that their contact on behalf of my mother constituted harassment, that I had a legal right to set boundaries with my family, and that continued unwanted contact would be documented for potential legal action. Within 24 hours of the letters being sent, my phone went silent. It was eerie and wonderful and deeply unsettling. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. Cassidy called that Wednesday to tell me Mom had been released and was staying with Aunt Linda. She's telling everyone you've had a psychotic break, Cassidy said, that your therapist has turned you against your family and filled your head with false memories. Grandma's buying it completely. I felt the familiar pull of guilt and obligation, the urge to call Mom and explain, to make her understand, to fix things. Then I remembered her sitting on my bedroom floor, photographing my trauma, and the feeling evaporated. Let her, I said. I have documentation, police reports, recordings. Anyone who believes her version over the evidence isn't someone I need in my life. That's most of the family, David, Cassidy said gently. I know, I said. I'm making peace with it. Good, she said, because I'm coming to court on Friday to support you, and I'm bringing my own folder of crazy shit she's done to me, just in case the judge needs more evidence. I could have cried. Cass, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she interrupted. Someone has to break this cycle. Might as well be us. Friday arrived with the kind of crystalline anxiety that makes every moment feel simultaneously too fast and impossibly slow. I wore a suit, on Rebecca's advice, and arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. Cassidy was already there, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom, wearing a dark blue dress and an expression of fierce determination. She stood up when she saw me and pulled me into a hug. Mom's here, she whispered, with Linda and Grandma and like 5 other people. They're staging some kind of intervention in the hallway. I turned and saw them. My mother, flanked by family members, all of them watching me with expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. Mom had clearly been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she was dressed in the kind of outfit she wore to church, projecting wounded dignity. Aunt Linda said something to her, and Mom nodded, then started walking toward me. Rebecca appeared at my elbow immediately. Don't engage, she said quietly. Not a single word. Mom stopped 3 feet away, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same one she'd worn my entire childhood. David, please, she said, her voice breaking. Can't we talk about this like adults? I'm your mother. I love you. I made a mistake, and I'm sorry. But this out. She gestured at the courthouse around us. Ow, this is insane. You're going to destroy our family over a misunderstanding? Behind her, Aunt Linda nodded encouragingly, and my grandmother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Rebecca stepped between us. Mrs. Foster, my client has made his wishes clear. He does not want contact with you, and your presence here is inappropriate. Please maintain distance, or I'll ask the bailiff to escort you to a different waiting area. Mom's expression flickered, calculation again. Just for a second, and then she turned to her assembled supporters with a helpless, martyred look. You see, she said to them, he won't even speak to me. His own mother. Grandmother made a soft, wounded sound. Uncle Robert put his hand on Mom's shoulder and glared at me like I was the villain in this scenario. The hearing began at 10 o'clock. Judge Melissa Hartwell presided, a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses perched on her nose and an air of having seen every possible variant of human dysfunction. The courtroom was small, just the judge's bench, a table for Rebecca and me, a table for Mom and her attorney, a young guy named Andrew Fitzgerald who looked fresh out of law school and deeply uncomfortable. Rebecca presented our case methodically, the police report, the recording, excerpts from my journal, I'd agreed to let her submit redacted portions that showed the pattern without revealing my actual therapy content. Statements from Officer Nguyen and Dr. Ramesh, documentation of the workplace incident, and the contacts during my divorce. Mom's attorney tried to paint it as a misunderstanding, a worried mother who'd overstepped in a moment of concern. Mrs. Foster broke into her adult son's home without permission, rifled through confidential medical records, photographed those records, and distributed them to third parties, Rebecca interrupted. That's not concern. That's a crime. My client has documented years of boundary violations, and this incident represents an escalation that puts his safety and mental health at risk. Judge Hartwell asked Mom directly, Mrs. Foster, did you have your son's permission to enter his home on the night in question? I have a key, Mom said. That's not what I asked. Did you have permission to be there that specific night? Mom hesitated, and I saw her attorney close his eyes briefly. I thought, he's always said I could stop by. Yes or no, Mrs. Foster? No, but... And did you have permission to access and photograph his private medical records? I was worried about him. His therapist is filling his head with, yes or no? Mom's face crumpled. No. The judge granted the restraining order. Temporary for now, 6 months, with a full hearing to follow if needed. Mom was prohibited from contacting me directly or indirectly, from coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace, from accessing any of my medical or personal information, and from enlisting third parties to contact me on her behalf. If she violated the order, she'd face criminal charges. Judge Hartwell delivered this all in a calm, measured tone, as if she were reading grocery items from a list, rather than dismantling 32 years of dysfunctional family dynamics. Mom started sobbing, loud, wrenching sobs that echoed through the small courtroom. Aunt Linda rushed forward to comfort her, shooting me a look of pure venom. Grandmother shook her head sadly, as if I'd just confirmed every terrible thing Mom had said about me. Only Cassidy stayed by my side, her hand finding mine and squeezing tight. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. Outside the courthouse, the family ambush continued. Uncle Robert cornered me on the steps, his face red with anger. You're going to regret this, he said. When she's gone, and you've wasted these years being stubborn and self-righteous, you're going to regret it. I looked at him, this man who'd watched my mother violate my boundaries my entire life and said nothing, who was now more concerned with maintaining the family's facade than with my actual well-being, and I felt nothing but pity. No, I said. I won't. Because for the first time in my life, I'm choosing my own health over her feelings. And if you can't understand why that's necessary, then you're part of the problem. The next few weeks were strange. My phone stayed mostly silent, the cease and desist letters having done their job. I changed my locks, even though I'd already gotten the spare key back from the police. I installed a Ring doorbell camera, just in case. I had 3 emergency sessions with Dr. Ramesh to process everything, to work through the complex tangle of grief and relief and guilt and freedom. You're mourning, he explained during one session. Not just the relationship you had with your mother, but the relationship you wished you could have had. That's a valid loss, David. Honor it, but don't let it pull you back into an unsafe dynamic. Cassidy and I started having weekly dinners, just the two of us, rebuilding a sibling relationship that had always existed in the shadow of Mom's needs and dramas. She told me stories I'd never heard, times Mom had read her diary, intercepted her college acceptance letters to try to convince her to stay local, called her graduate school advisor to express concerns about Cassidy's mental health when Cassidy had set a boundary. We laughed and cried and marveled at how we'd both spent so long thinking we were the problem, that if we just tried harder or loved better or needed less, Mom would finally be satisfied. The thing is, Cassidy said one evening over Thai food, she'll never be satisfied. Because the problem isn't us, it's that she needs us to need her. She needs to be central to our lives, to our identities, to our emotional worlds. And the healthier we get, the more independent we become, the more threatening that is to her sense of self. She twirled pad thai around her fork thoughtfully. It's sad, actually. She could have had 2 adult children who loved her and wanted her in their lives. Instead, she has 2 adult children who had to legally force her to back off. About 8 weeks after the restraining order was granted, I got a call from Officer Nguyen. Mr. Foster, I wanted to give you a heads up. Your mother was arrested again last night. My heart dropped. What happened? She showed up at your workplace. Your boss called it in when she refused to leave and started demanding to speak with you. She was charged with violating the restraining order. She's being held pending a hearing on Monday. I felt sick. Not because I felt bad for Mom, but because I'd hoped the restraining order would be enough, that she'd finally understand I was serious. Instead, she'd escalated. Again. I called Rebecca, who'd anticipated this possibility. This actually helps our case, she said, though her tone was sympathetic. It demonstrates that the restraining order was necessary and that your mother is either unwilling or unable to respect legal boundaries. The judge will likely extend the order and possibly add conditions. The Monday hearing was brief. Mom's attorney, looking even more uncomfortable than before, tried to argue that she'd simply wanted to deliver a birthday card. My birthday was still 6 weeks away, and hadn't realized the workplace was included in the restraining order. Judge Hartwell was unimpressed. Mrs. Foster, When this court issued a restraining order prohibiting you from contacting your son directly or indirectly, did you understand what that meant? Yes, but ow. No buts, Mrs. Foster. You violated a court order. That's a criminal offense. I'm extending the restraining order to 3 years and adding a provision that any further violations will result in immediate jail time. Do you understand? Mom understood. I watched something shift in her posture, a kind of deflation, as if she'd finally realized this wasn't a battle she could win through tears or manipulation or sheer force of will. She left the courthouse quietly, flanked by Aunt Linda and her attorney, not looking in my direction. I felt relief, yes, but also a deep, aching sadness. This was my mother, the woman who'd taught me to ride a bike and made my favorite soup when I was sick and stayed up all night helping me with my science fair project in 6th grade. She was also the woman who'd violated my privacy, gaslit me about my own experiences, and refused to see me as a separate person with valid needs and boundaries. Both things were true, and I was learning to hold that complexity without letting it pull me back into the dysfunction. 6 months after that first night, I sat in Dr. Ramesh's office for a regular session and realized something had shifted. The panic attacks had stopped entirely. I was sleeping through the night. I'd started dating again. Nothing serious. Just coffee with a woman named Alicia I'd met at a bookstore. Conversations that felt easy and honest and free of the eggshell walking that had characterized my marriage to Melissa. I had energy for hobbies again. I'd joined a recreational basketball league, started woodworking classes at a local makerspace, reconnected with friends I'd slowly lost touch with during the years I'd spent managing Mom's emotional needs. How do you feel? Dr. Ramesh asked, and I had to really think about it. How did I feel? Lighter, I said finally. Like I've been carrying a weight I didn't even know was there, and someone finally told me I was allowed to put it down. He smiled. That's exactly what boundaries do, David. They distribute the weight appropriately. Your mother's emotions, her choices, her inability to respect your autonomy, none of that was ever yours to carry. You're not responsible for fixing her or managing her feelings or sacrificing your well-being to maintain a relationship she refused to make healthy. Cassidy moved back to Portland 3 months later, taking a job at Oregon Health and Science University. We found apartments in the same neighborhood, close enough to walk to each other's places, but far enough to maintain independence. We had keys to each other's apartments, but we used them the way normal, healthy people do, with explicit permission for actual emergencies, with respect for privacy and boundaries. It felt revolutionary. The family grapevine occasionally sent updates through distant cousins who hadn't cut contact with both sides. Mom was in therapy now, apparently, though whether that was court-mandated or voluntary, no one seemed to know. She'd moved in with Aunt Linda permanently, her own house sold. The family had fractured. Some sided with Mom, others quietly reached out to Cassidy and me to express support they'd been too afraid to voice publicly. My grandmother passed away 8 months after the restraining order was issued, and Mom sent a message through her attorney asking if I'd be willing to attend the funeral. I declined. It felt cold, but Dr. Ramesh helped me see it as self-protection. Grief was real, but so was the need to maintain the boundaries that had given me my life back. A year to the day after I found Mom on my bedroom floor, I wrote a new entry in my therapy journal. Not a catalog of violations or a record of pain, but a reflection on growth. I wrote about learning to trust my instincts, to honor my needs, to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I wrote about the friends who'd stayed, the sister I'd reconnected with, the career opportunities I'd pursued now that I wasn't constantly managing family crises. I wrote about dating Alicia, about the moment she'd asked me what my boundaries were around communication, and I'd nearly cried at the simple acknowledgement that I was allowed to have boundaries. Most importantly, I wrote about the lesson I was still learning, that love without respect isn't really love at all. That family relationships aren't exempt from the basic requirements of healthy human interaction: consent, privacy, autonomy, trust. That being someone's child doesn't make you responsible for their emotional regulation or obligated to accept treatment you wouldn't tolerate from a stranger. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and even for the other person, is to enforce a boundary so clear and firm that it can't be misunderstood or negotiated away. I still struggle with guilt sometimes. Late at night, I'll think about Mom alone at Aunt Linda's and wonder if I should have tried harder, done more, found some middle ground. Then I remember her sitting on my floor, photographing my trauma, and I remember that I did try. For 32 years I tried. I tried to be the son she wanted, to meet her needs, to make her happy. The problem was never my effort. It was that no amount of effort would ever be enough because the issue wasn't what I was doing. It was who she needed me to be, a possession, an extension, a source of supply rather than a separate human being. Dr. Ramesh says healing isn't linear, and he's right. Some days I feel strong and clear and grateful for the boundaries I've built. Other days, I feel like the worst son in the world, an ungrateful monster who abandoned his mother over a misunderstanding. On those days, I go back and read my journal from before, the pages documenting years of violations, the entries describing panic attacks and self-doubt and the constant exhausting work of managing someone else's emotions. I read the police report. I listened to the recording. I remind myself that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern, and patterns don't change through wishful thinking. Cassidy and I talk about Mom sometimes, usually late at night after a few glasses of wine. We wonder if she's getting better, if therapy is helping her understand why her children had to cut contact. We wonder if she's capable of the kind of self-reflection required to change, or if she's just learned to be more careful about hiding the behavior. We wonder if we'll ever have a relationship with her again, and what that would look like, and whether it's even safe to hope for it. Maybe someday, Cassidy said recently, curled up on my couch after a particularly heavy conversation. Maybe when we're both stronger, when we have more practice holding boundaries, when we're not at risk of falling back into old patterns. Maybe then we could try supervised visits or family therapy or something. Maybe, I agreed. But only if she's done the work. Real work, not performance. And only if we're both ready. And only if it doesn't cost us the peace we've built, she added. Right, I said. Because that's not negotiable anymore. The restraining order is up for renewal next month. Rebecca has advised me to extend it for another 3 years, at minimum. Your mother hasn't attempted contact in months, which is good, she said during our last meeting. But that doesn't mean she's changed. It might just mean she's learned the consequences of getting caught. Keep the order in place until you're absolutely certain you can maintain boundaries without legal protection. I'm going to take her advice. Not because I want to punish Mom, but because I've learned that my peace of mind is worth protecting, even if that protection has to come through court orders and legal documents. People sometimes ask me if I regret calling the police that night, if I think I overreacted. I tell them the truth. That night saved my life. Not in a dramatic, immediate sense, but in the slow, fundamental way that establishing boundaries creates space for healing. If I hadn't called the police, I would have let Mom gaslight me into believing I was crazy for being upset. I would have accepted her excuses, made allowances for her behavior, convinced myself that I was being too sensitive. I would have let her keep the journal and the photos and the narrative that I was the problem. I would have stayed trapped in a dynamic that was slowly destroying my mental health, all in the name of being a good son. Instead, I chose myself. I chose honesty over peacekeeping, boundaries over obligation, my own well-being over someone else's comfort. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and it was absolutely the right choice. The family that matters, Cassidy, the friends who stood by me, the new relationships I've built with people who respect boundaries, they're all better, because I finally learned to respect myself enough to demand respect from others. Sometimes I think about that moment, standing in my bedroom doorway, watching my mother photograph my trauma. I think about the thousands of small moments that led to that night, all the times I swallowed my discomfort and convinced myself I was being unreasonable. I think about how different my life might be if I'd learned earlier that I was allowed to say no, to lock my doors, to keep parts of myself private. But I also know that maybe I needed all those experiences to get to the point where I could finally, definitively, choose myself. I'm not the same person who gave his mother a spare key 3 years ago. That David thought love meant access, that family meant no secrets, that being a good son meant sacrificing his own needs indefinitely. This David knows better. This David has boundaries like property lines, clearly marked, carefully maintained, and absolutely non-negotiable. This David sleeps through the night and has healthy relationships and doesn't measure his worth by how well he manages other people's emotions. And this David knows that the most loving thing he ever did for his mother was to stop enabling her dysfunction. Whether she ever understands that or not is her journey. Mine was learning to stop waiting for her permission to live my own life. I wrote that in my journal last week, and then I closed the book and went to play basketball with my league and had dinner with Alicia and called Cassidy to laugh about something silly that happened at her work. I lived my life, freely and fully, in the space that boundaries created. That's what freedom looks like. It's not dramatic or perfect. It's quiet and daily and sometimes sad and often lonely, but ultimately mine. And after 32 years of living for someone else's needs and expectations and emotional regulation, mine is enough. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.